To the Special Forces soldiers of Saab, Vietnam meant working undercover, almost alone in the Southeast Asian jungles. To succeed against a cunning enemy of vast numbers, they routinely called upon depths of courage rarely seen, even in war. When one wrong move, one momentary lapse meant death, the men of Saab stared deep into the face of fear and refused to blink. Saab, next on Dangerous Missions. Even within the military, SOG, the Studies and Observations Group, was a well-kept secret. They operated behind enemy lines, small six-man reconnaissance teams designed to uncover and interfere with the North Vietnamese and their ability to wage war against the South.
You know, we always heard rumors that they had this unit in Vietnam. They were doing all this type of clandestine activity, but nobody really was sure what they were doing.
What did these guys do? Every now and then you'd run into an old-timer with that 1,000-yard stare who just got back. And it was, ooh, but nobody's talking about it.
For these brave men, the costs were extraordinary.
Our casualty rates were about 100%. Every single Special Forces American running recon was at least wounded. Those that were not were killed or missing in action.
Every time you're on a helicopter going into a mission, you think, why am I doing this again for?
Against outrageous odds, they fought their way out, inflicting lasting casualties to their enemy and to themselves.
It was a shriek I'll never forget. Never heard anything like it before, never heard anything like it since.
It's almost like you're out of your body and you're watching. But that's the attitude you have to take in order to survive.
For centuries, Vietnam fought with its large and powerful neighbor to the north, China. Then, during the colonial period, the French claimed Vietnam as their colony. Following the turmoil of World War II, the French returned to Southeast Asia and tried to re-establish colonial rule. It wasn't easy. Following the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in 1954, the French pulled out of Vietnam. There was now a communist regime in the north, led by the Parisian-educated Ho Chi Minh, and the remnants of Emperor Bao Dai's rule in the south. Into this volatile situation stepped the United States.
In the last few years of the French presence, we were supplying 85% of their costs, all their uniforms, their equipment, and so forth. And with the departure of the French, we began activating an organization called Military Assistance and Advisory Group Vietnam, Macv.
But it almost didn't turn out this way. There was once a possibility that instead of being bitter enemies locked in a brutal dance of death, Vietnam would actually become part of America.
There was a time when Ho Chi Minh asked if Vietnam couldn't become a colony of the United States, just like the Philippines were, and we'd help Vietnam as we were helping the Philippines. But President Truman saw fit to ignore this and did not answer. It would have simply changed the course of world history had we accepted this.
America found itself slowly enmeshed in the growing conflict in Vietnam. Military leaders in the Pentagon became convinced the communist regime of North Vietnam was slowly building up the machine to wage a full-scale, covert war against South Vietnam, where a precarious democracy, with American support, attempted to hold out against the North. Ho Chi Minh wanted one united Vietnam, free from foreign influence, and with the support of the Soviet Union and China, was willing to fight a long war to achieve it. As the CIA learned of the buildup in the North, they increased the size and scope of their intelligence gathering activities in the South. in the aftermath of the CIA's disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba. A review of other CIA operations elsewhere in the world concluded all large-scale CIA operations should be turned over to the military. In January of 1964, Macv became Macv, Military Assistance and Command, Vietnam, and inherited the role, the manpower, and the apparatus of clandestine activity in and relating to Vietnam. The philosophy of SOG's approach to war had its origins in the American Revolution, when the penchant for unconventional tactics yielded battlefield success. The guerrilla tactics employed by colonial militias picked off the British in their conveniently bright red coats as they marched through the American wilderness. During World War II, the Office of Strategic Services, the forerunner of the CIA, sent men behind enemy lines to work with local groups in acts of intelligence gathering and sabotage. SOG made use of these past successes in the creation of reconnaissance teams, combining 2 or 3 American troops and 2 or 3 indigenous troops, either Vietnamese, Hmong tribesmen, or Montagnards. Recruiting the indigenous fighters led to some interesting encounters.
Montagnard is a French word meaning mountain people. Of course, the good old American dialect, we call it mountain yard, and then we just started calling them yards for short. And they are the jungle people.
In most cases, SOG members J.D. Bath and Jim Hetrick had an easy time recruiting soldiers from village ranks.
Most of the time, they were, it was easy to get along with, and we would show our gratitude. We would bring in these bolts of material, bright colored material, because they like to make their own clothes, dresses and things, and blouses, and that they wore for ceremonial only.
But one village chief at first refused the American soldiers, leading to several tense and uncomfortable moments. The chief's initial reaction was cold and distant.
We're looking at each other, and both of us, I think the hair was just standing straight out on the back of our necks. We're going to get killed. These guys are Viet Cong or something.
It turned out a missionary who had dug a well for the village and smoked a pipe had promised a pipe to the chief. Though the well was built and functioned, the chief never got his pipe.
We went down to the base exchange and we bought a big can of Sir Walter Riley and a big can of Prince Albert smoking tobacco and a couple of pipes, and we brought those back and gave it to the village chief, right? Shoot, we could do no wrong after that. Yeah, he was happy now, right? So we got a couple of guys from him, yeah.
Once the teams were assembled, special training began and continued. It was the sharpened skills of the SOG members, drawn from the military's elite, like the Army Special Forces and Navy SEALs, that often meant the difference between life and death, despite being vastly outnumbered.
You don't really want to make contact with the enemy, but it doesn't work out like that most of the time. The whole idea was to gather intelligence. Okay, there's 1,000 North Vietnamese here, there's a base camp over there, they have machine guns here, they have tanks there, they have trucks over here. And you would report all this information back to headquarters, and then they would just map that out.
From the beginning of their time in Vietnam, the all-volunteer members of SOG knew the rumors only hinted at the way their new world was part of a separate, top-secret reality.
I will always remember the first SOG brief that I got when I finally found out what we were really doing was Colonel Jack Warren. You have to understand, he was wearing a green beret, a black windbreaker, shower shoes, and smoking with a cigarette holder. And he flamboyantly threw back this curtain, and here's this map of Southeast Asia, and I'm looking at one side, which is Vietnam, but all these boxes are on the left side of the map, which is Laos. And I keep looking over to Vietnam. He says, "Gentlemen, welcome to the covert world."
The soldiers of SOG operated in regions where their presence was officially denied. But on the ground, the complete reality of war was a daily reminder of death's omnipresence.
Then it starts to hit a little bit you know, what you're into. But you don't really appreciate it till you go out on a mission.
With the landing of the first American combat troops in the spring of 1965, the situation in Southeast Asia accelerated into a significant armed struggle.
We had three major command and control detachments, one up north, northern part of South Vietnam, one in the middle and one in the southern portion. And from these bases, we would launch our teams into Cambodia and Laos.
The soldiers of the Studies and Observations Group, or SOG, took nothing with them and wore no clothing that would identify them as Americans when they ran reconnaissance or recon missions. The tiny force of 200 soldiers was covert and undercover.
I would wear a black flop hat with a red star, so if anybody saw me, they would think I was a Russian advisor. I would also wear a North Vietnamese shirt. So if you're not wearing U.S. Army, you're considered a spy. So what they do is they deny that you've ever even gone in there if you get captured.
Because the goal was to gather intelligence, the recon teams tried to avoid enemy contact.
SOG's primary mission was intelligence gathering, to learn what the enemy had and where it was in Laos and Cambodia, the so-called sanctuaries of Cambodia.
SOG recon teams had unique designations for their team members.
The 1-0 was the team leader. 1-1 was the second American. If you had a third American, he was a 1-2. It was your team. You led the team, you planned the operations, you were given a mission, and you took it and ran with it from there on.
Team members carried enough weapons, food, and water to get them through a 5-day reconnaissance mission. The favored SOG firearm was the automatic Car-15, a variation of the M16 with a stock that expanded or contracted.
We always carried a basic load of 550 to 600 rounds for the Car-15, and hand grenades about 10, and plus a dozen or more rounds for the M79. And in the gear, we always carried weighed between 80 and 90 pounds between the weapons, the bullets, etc.
To support the teams when they were on the ground, during daytime, a forward air controller, or FAC, flew in a small single-engine propeller plane to maintain radio contact.
You always wanted the FAC to know where you were. A good radio operator would always let the FAC know they're in this location. And the reason you would do that is because if somebody shoots at you or you need an immediate exfiltration, he doesn't have to search around finding out, where you are.
In order to facilitate their mission, SOG recon teams, like everything else they did, arrived unconventionally and made their way through the jungle unconventionally.
Ideally, you go in and land. 3 guys get off, and then another helicopter would come in, and the other 3 guys get off, and we go on from there. Occasionally, because of the terrain, we would rappel in or go down a ladder.
I remember the sound of the helicopters. It was very loud, and then you get ready to go into the landing zone, so the helicopters would take you in. And then I remember it was very, very noisy. You would get on the ground, the helicopter would take off, and all of a sudden there was silence. And all you heard was the jungle sound of bugs, that sort of whining that you see in the old Tarzan movies, from the insects.
You never talk at all, really, when you're out in the bush. There are do's and do nots, and one of the big do nots is verbally communicating when you're out in the field. Listen for sounds. That was another key thing I always thought, was you always listened, and you wanted to hear the natural sounds of birds, of maybe the monkeys in the trees, of insects. Normally, if you didn't hear that, there was something that might be going on. There may be an ambush being set up. People might be in a place which frightens the animals themselves there. They may be super quiet. So if you heard super quiet, normally something was amiss.
When you do this type of operation, stealth is the most important thing. So you walk very, very slowly, and that's why you would see a lot of things, because they couldn't hear you. So you would walk around, and then they would stop, and you use hand signals.
But sometimes, no matter how stealthy, no matter how successful the recon teams were at traveling off the trail, there were inevitably times when they came in contact with the enemy. The North Vietnamese had a system of spotters and trackers searching for the SOG recon teams. From the moment the teams landed, they were prime enemy targets. capture meant almost certain death. In October 1968, John Meyer's team was assigned target Echo 4.
We moved for a whole day, but the trackers were getting to close in on us. They found our trail somewhere. At night, they were within maybe 25, 30 feet of us. So first light, we moved out, and about 1:30 in the afternoon, after moving all day, got to the top of a little hill, set up there, and I called the tactical, said, try to get somebody in the air. We said, you know, we're going to have contact here. So they finally hit us about 2 o'clock. They came after us, wave after wave. We just blew them back down the hill, blew them back down the hill. And at one point, they began stacking the bodies up. We just killed so many of them. But when they first opened up, I mean, it's that first jolt. It's almost like an apocalyptic death roar.
Finally, the air cover arrived, including helicopter gunships and A-1E Sky Raiders carrying napalm. The mission to target Echo 4 was over. The goal now was to hold the enemy back and bring a helicopter in to carry the SOG team back to base and to safety. The transport helicopter couldn't get in right on top of the SOG team. They had to fight their way through 25-foot-high elephant grass to reach the chopper and their ride home.
They're shooting at the helicopter. The gunships are coming around doing the gun runs to suppress any fire. We finally get to the helicopter, throw everybody in the helicopter, literally. It's just hovering there. And we looked up, and Captain Tin was just sitting there, just as cool as the Rocky Mountain breeze, just sitting there like, okay, guys, anytime you're ready to go home, I'm ready.
And like so many things surrounding the Vietnam War, the contrasts at the edge of life and death are always extreme.
1 minute, you're at this trauma to the max. They're trying to get us, the gunships, all this turmoil. Then we get back to Phu-Bai, there's an Australian floor show. So all the guys are in there, hey, you guys got back great, look at the floor show. And you're going, wait a minute, we just barely got out of there. And then during the floor show, one of my buddies was talking, he said, well, how'd it go? Well, I said, it's really bad. Well, did you kill anybody? I said, you know, I hadn't thought about it, but today's the first time I know I killed somebody. But in the heat of it, no, you don't think about it. But you came back, and it's like, oh my God. And then, so you talk about it, you know. He says, you just can't let it bother you. Because if you didn't get him, he would have got you, and you wouldn't have got, you're not going to go home.
As the Vietnam War continued and escalated, the pressing need for more specific information about enemy troop and supply movements down the Ho Chi Minh Trail grew more urgent.
And the North Vietnamese were really good at camouflaging their vehicles during the day, moving them at night, and then they'd bring the supplies down into South Vietnam through Laos and Cambodia by vehicle. And we were interested in trying to determine where these things came from, what was being carried in them, and where they were unloading them, and any routes they were using to get into South Vietnam itself.
Sending teams in to watch the trail didn't accomplish the task of gathering all the vital intelligence needed. Only one method could achieve the desired goal, one of the riskiest assignments handed out to any studies and observations group recon team: the prisoner snatch. Actually capturing a North Vietnamese soldier from Laos or Cambodia and returning with him to a SOG base in South Vietnam for interrogation.
In March of 1970, there had been a series of convoys running on Highway 110 in southern Laos, right up to the border of South Vietnam, then disappearing. Supplies were being stockpiled for some major action.
SOG 10, John Plaster, was given the task of snatching a prisoner. He devised a plan and drilled his team non-stop for 2 weeks to achieve optimum precision and performance levels.
The key person to snatch would be the lead driver of a truck convoy. because he had to know where the supplies were being picked up. He probably saw the manifests of what was being loaded because he'd be accountable. And he was the guide for his entire convoy, so he had to know where they were going. And of course, if this intelligence could be developed, the result would be a series of B-52 strikes on those locations.
Finally, the time came to put the risky plan into action. Claymore mines would be used to immobilize the lead truck. A Claymore is a versatile explosive device, easy to set up, which can be remotely triggered.
I still remember that first night as we were laying on a hillside about 2 kilometers from the highway. We could hear trucks rolling down it at night. It was both exciting and a little fearful. We knew they were there, and the next night we would be down on that highway. We reached it by about noon.
Everything was in place. There was only one thing left to do, perhaps the hardest thing of all: wait. Just at the point of darkness, Plaster deployed flank security teams.
I thought it'd be a very short wait. We laid there for like 2 hours before another truck came. I waited till just the tire was lining up, ducked down, fired the Claymores. Tremendous roar as these Claymores go off. I hollered assault. We all got up on the highway. John Yancey, my assistant team leader, jerked open the door, grabbed the driver. I ran around to take out the assistant driver. He had no assistant driver. Richard Woody ran around the rear in case there were any troops in the back. There weren't. There were supplies in there instead. My fellow team leader was there covering from the hood of the truck in case there was a threat of someone coming over the back. But there was no resistance. There was only the driver.
So far, so good. They had the driver, and there had been no contact with the enemy until team member Richard Woody sounded the signal to withdraw.
He blows twice on the whistle. When he blew the second time, a North Vietnamese soldier shot him twice.
Woody was injured badly. Both arms were incapacitated. Plaster bundled him up to stop the bleeding and handed him off to the rest of the team, now headed for the rendezvous site back in the jungle. But time was running short.
Our intelligence had estimated that there was a North Vietnamese battalion base camp within about a half mile of where we were, and that would have been 500 North Vietnamese troops. So we could not stay there very long at all.
Plaster stays behind to cover his team's withdrawal and blows up the truck.
Fortunately, that truck caught fire, and therefore we had a beacon for fighters. And they were able to bomb that road up and down it all night long and kept the enemy basically pinned down along the road. The enemy was so preoccupied with just trying to avoid this bombing, and they were hitting other trucks, that they never caught up with us in the jungle. We marched almost all night until about an hour before dawn. They were there with the helicopters to pick us up. As quickly as the sun broke over the horizon, boom, the choppers were there.
Back at base, there was no marching band, no photographer, no medal ready to be awarded. SOG members never even learned of the results of their life and death efforts. But their success was well known within SOG.
It was a very hairy operation and a very heroic one. John Plaster was a team leader on that one, I think, and he deserved a lot of respect for what he did.
But prisoner snatches didn't always go so smoothly. SOG member Bill Deasy was assigned flank security on an attempted prisoner snatch mission.
As soon as we set up, I would say we weren't there more than 5 minutes. And I looked to the left up the trail, and I could see approximately 5 or 6 troops coming down. Some of them had bicycles, so I was watching them coming up, going by, and I remember having the gun ready to do a spray real quick if they looked over and they spotted me.
But they passed DC without noticing him and approached the capture point, called the kill zone. The plan called for the SOG team to kill all but one of the small group of North Vietnamese soldiers and take the remaining one alive back to base.
I'm getting anxious, I'm breathing, I'm aware that within a matter of seconds there's going to be a lot of gunfire and it's going to be death. And it's just starting to come up into the kill zone. upon a kill team. As I turned and looked to my left up the trail, all I could see was a column and pith helmets and pith helmets and pith helmets. And as far as I could see were these heads bobbing up and down walking. Now the fellows that are on the kill team can't see that far up the trail because it turned somewhat. I was saying to myself, please God, don't let them jump up and try and grab these fellas because they're not aware of this large column of NVA right behind them.
For the kill team, there was no way of knowing what DC knew. For DC, there was no way to warn them. Once again, all DC could do was wait.
Next thing I remember hearing was the most god-awful sound I ever heard. It was a human shriek. One of those NVA saw them coming and realized he was going to die. And again, it was a shriek I'll never forget. Never heard anything like it before, never heard anything like it since. But as soon as that happened, I knew it was over. Kill team opened up. I opened up on the column coming down. I remember firing, frantically, up and down, just swinging it as much as I could.
Out of the corner of his eye, DC saw some action coming at him from his left, from the direction of the kill zone.
The last one had escaped the kill team, and he was firing at me, and I fired at him. And next thing I knew, my gun wouldn't work. So I'm saying to myself, what's the matter? Why is this thing broken? And I looked down at my car 15, and I saw blood flowing down. I saw blood all over these stock, and I saw a bullet sticking out of the side of the bevel. I said, what is that? And I said, my first thought was my rifle malfunctioned and something blew out there.
But what had really happened was that the enemy bullet was stopped by DC's gun, saving his life.
God was with me that day. That was luck. It wasn't to be my day.
Sometimes SOG was called on to perform another type of snatch mission, going behind enemy lines to rescue downed U.S. fighter pilots. During the largest NVA offensive to date, during Easter 1972, an electronic warfare plane, Bat-21, was shot down by a surface-to-air, or SAM, missile. 53-year-old Lieutenant Colonel ISEAL Gene Hambleton was the only crewman to make it to the ground alive. After several failed rescue attempts and mounting losses, SOG was asked to help. SOG SEAL Lieutenant Tom Norris needed someone to go with him. Kiet Van Nguyen was a South Vietnamese Navy SEAL assigned to SOG.
Tom already asked me, what do you think, Kiet? You want to go with me? I told him, if you go, I go. If you work, I work. If you return home, I return home.
Because helicopter insertion had failed, and because of the vast numbers of enemy troops surrounding Hambleton's position near the Mien Gian River, Norris chose the waterborne approach. He and Van Nguyen dressed as fishermen.
We got a sampan, look like a small kayak in this country, very small. And that sampan, we keep go upstream.
And I saw this little sampan, and the first thing I saw was that Vietnamese sitting in the front. And he's got a rifle, which I think is an AK-47, and I thought, well, hell, they found me now. And they kept paddling, and all I could think of was, well, here I is, boys, take me to your leader, you know.
The Vietnamese soldier was actually Kiet Van Nguyen, accompanied by Tom Norris.
He says, Colonel, I says, Roger. He says, get your butt in here and let's get the hell out of here. So they come over, threw me in the back of the sampan and covered me up with banana leaves, and down the river we go.
On their way to safety, there were several close calls.
I saw many bullets spray in the water on the left river bank. And I pulled many grass and cover Hamilton right away at that time. Because I do not want to lose him, I do not want enemy to see him.
Hambleton was safe, The rescue of Bat-21 was a striking SOG success. Lieutenant Tom Norris received the Medal of Honor, and Kiet Van Nguyen was awarded the Navy Cross. No other member of the South Vietnamese military received this high honor. Now a U.S. citizen, Van Nguyen saw Hamilton at a recent SOG reunion.
He really happy, and I am really happy too.
For many people, the Vietnam War is synonymous with helicopters. For SOG, they were the critical means of transporting the teams from their base to the ground and bringing them safely home again. 98% of insertions and extractions were by helicopter. In the early years of the war, SOG teams had a relatively easy time of landing and unloading. But as the war progressed, like many things, it became more difficult. The North Vietnamese began monitoring likely areas for helicopter landings.
Therefore, maybe we would rappel in. Maybe we would come in on a short ladder. From a low hovering helicopter, we'd climb down to, within 5-8 feet of the ground and jump through some brush onto the ground and still insert.
From the chopper pilot's perspective, entering Cambodian or Laotian airspace to insert or extract a SOG team amidst enemy fire was something they took in stride.
You would certainly rather be doing something else when you're getting shot at. But the flying aspect of it, getting our guys in and getting them back out, we kind of had the pleasure of thinking that we're helping make that mission go.
SOG team members knew and appreciated the dangers the pilots faced daily.
These are probably the best guys anywhere, because it's one thing to have somebody shoot at you and you're shooting back at them, but the helicopter pods are in a glass bubble and they just have to sit there until everybody was loaded in and then get you out.
Once the SOG team came into contact with the enemy and needed extraction, they would call the FAC, who would relay the transport need immediately back to a SOG base.
We got a call from the FAC that we need to do an extract. Nobody waited for anybody else. It was just a timed event. Because a lot of times we were sitting there with no shirts on or anything else, sunbathing and who knows what, just killing time. So if we could just take off bare skin, if nothing else, just go.
In almost every case, the choppers arrived amidst a pitched battle, a perfect floating target for the enemy. Helicopter crews and SOG team members were prize captures for the North Vietnamese. And even more NVA teams were created to monitor, track, and neutralize SOG's operations.
I'm not going to tell you that there weren't times that I'd like to have flown the other direction, but we didn't do it, and none of my buds did either.
Often, during an extraction of a SOG recon team, one helicopter would circle the team and fire at the enemy to keep them back, so another helicopter could come in and get the team out.
There's two types of helicopters used. One was called the Slick, and basically was used to transport people. And the other, of course, would be the gunship. In our particular case, we used Charlie model gunships because the Thunder Chickens, our gunships, could actually put fire down within 30 feet friendly.
It got to the point where birds are coming back in with 10, 15 bullet holes in them. In fact, we had one of them old H-34 Sikorskys. I think there was 80-some bullet holes across the nose, up through the cabin and out through the transmission case on that bird, and the guy flew it back. But yeah, those birds took a beating. They took a hell of a beating.
When the helicopters couldn't land, they would drop down lines, called stable rigs, for the SOG members to use. Each chopper could carry 3 SOG members this way. The team rode back to base, dangling under the chopper.
Stable rig it was the toughest. And it ain't the carnival ride that you hear about. You've got 100 feet of string coming out of a helicopter, and you're trying to hook up into this rig, and you got to make sure as a team leader that everybody else is hooked up too. This is like a parachute harness that you hook up.
Sometimes, even when the SOG team was on board or attached, and the choppers were up and moving away from the LZs, safety was still not in sight. One time, Bill Deasy was climbing up a rope ladder trying to leave a hot LZ.
I would say I was halfway up the ladder and the chopper started to rise and lift off. You could see he wanted to take off. Unfortunately, when I was starting to snap link in, I heard a loud boom, and immediately the chopper started twisting, doing 360s and just flailing all over the place. My own thought was, as I was holding onto the ladder and being swung around, was to immediately get out from underneath the chopper, because I knew this thing's coming down. You can't be underneath it when it hits. I had been knocked unconscious. Part of the chopper slammed me on my right side. It fractured my skull and knocked all my right teeth out, screwed up my spine, and I aroused to tremendous heat, and I could feel it mostly on my left side. I tried to get out and move, but I was entangled in the rope ladder, so my legs were caught underneath the one part of the chopper, I'm not sure which.
2 soldiers made an attempt to drag DC away from the helicopter, but the intense flames forced them back.
One of the fellas said, "We're going to have to shoot him." And I think the intent, as somebody that once mentioned to me, was to pull a bullet in my head rather than let me burn to death. But 1 or 2 of the fellas said, "Let's try one more time." And they came down and they untangled my legs, and then they started moving away quickly because it was very hot. But I remember crawling away from the chopper.
Amazingly, DC hadn't made it to safety yet. Another helicopter arrived to bring the SOG team and chopper crews back to safety. But there weren't enough stable rigs for everyone. They told DC to hold on to another soldier.
I just put my arms around his neck and straddled him, wrapped my legs around his hips, and I was going to come out like that. I was losing blood, and I started slipping down his body. I was losing my strength. And I think my head was down by his belly button or his abdomen, and I just said to him, I said, "Please don't drop me."
Miraculously, the chopper made it back, the soldier still holding on to DC. After 2 weeks in the hospital, SOG man Bill DC was back in action, running recon with his team. The longer the war went on, the more sophisticated tactics became on both sides. Because of the location of the Ho Chi Minh Trail and the extensive knowledge of the terrain gained by the North Vietnamese, most of SOG's landing zones were mapped and constantly watched by the enemy. It was time to try something new. SOG member Cliff Newman was actually an accomplished skydiver even before joining Special Forces in SOG. He was a natural choice to lead a critical test mission. The new jump concept was dubbed Halo for high altitude, low opening. That meant parachuting from an airplane above 18,000 feet, free falling, and then opening the chute just 1,500 feet above the ground.
When we actually made our insert, we kept looking at each other like, okay, they can turn this thing back any time now. But they kept going.
The problem was the weather. They were flying through the middle of a storm, and it was pouring rain.
You fall through rain, it's like people poking with ice picks. Eerie feeling. And I figure I'm really up the creek now, you know. No one knows where I am. I'm in a rainstorm, trying to look at my altimeter and wondering where the hell I am. And when I opened, I was in a cloud. I came out of the clouds and I saw the terrain features, you know, in the dark. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning. Landed in a drizzling rain, all by myself. I figured that was the stupidest thing I ever did in my entire life.
Newman and the other team members made it safely to the ground.
I had a homing device that the other team members were supposed to home in on me on, but this homing device wasn't designed to work in the rain. So I put it up and turned it on and sat there for a little while. It wasn't working. And we just got roamed around for 5 days. No one knew we were there.
The primary goal of inserting a SOG team had been accomplished. The mission was deemed a success and also marked a first.
We researched everything. We could find no evidence of a high-altitude halo jump ever having been done in combat. So we were credited with making the first one ever done.
There were a total of 5 halo missions in Vietnam. Because of the uncertainty of the weather, the unpredictable jungle terrain, and the end of the war, Halo as a means of inserting SOG teams never evolved beyond the experimental stage. Sadly, on one jump, SOG member Sergeant Madison Strollline landed in a tree with a broken arm. Despite several rescue attempts, he was captured by the enemy, never to be seen or heard from again.
Well, I always thought it was crazy. I never thought of it as a suicide mission. You know, I mean, like I say, I love life, and I love it even more now that I figure I almost lost it. And so I didn't, you know, always plan on coming back.
Today, Halo jumps have progressed into a science, with the knowledge gained at a cost during the Vietnam War, allowing covert teams to be inserted virtually at will, anywhere, anytime. It's just one of the valuable lessons that's part of the legacy of SOG.
The trainers who came back from SOG, who became the bedrock for Delta Force, for what became Navy Special Operations Forces, for Special Forces and the Rangers today. These people were veterans of SOG. Those lessons spread throughout the Special Operations community.
And the personal lessons, rewards, and sacrifices still reverberate down the years.
For me, I was very proud of what I did, okay, even now. It's like people always say, well, you know, they are a Vietnam veteran, and it's like, you know, they're ashamed they were doing this, they were doing that. If you look at the after effects of what happened to Vietnam and Cambodia, you see that the North Vietnamese, you know, weren't such the nice people that they're made out to be. So, I mean, I was very proud of what I did. You know, I had a mission to do. I accomplished whatever I can do is what I did. And, you know, I have nothing to be ashamed of.
For many years, you feel funny. I mean, I feel funny saying, well, I worked in Laos, even now, because it's highly classified at one time. You don't do secret things for the accolades, because nobody's going to know about them. It's kind of good that we're getting recognition, that people know that people did some of the things we did. I'm kind of glad to see that.
The Vietnam War provided many lasting lessons, not the least of which is the way incredible beauty can exist side by side with dreadful carnage.
Another time we ran all day. I think at the top of the mountains, there were thousands of wild orchids. Magnificent. And I worked in a flower shop when I was a kid, delivering flowers for Johnny Alanowski, you know, back in Trenton, New Jersey, delivering flowers. And I said, God, if John Alanowski were here now, we could make a fortune. Cut these things off. It's near Easter time, you know. And the NVA were always there. And they were just pretty much relentless. Just a startling contrast.
The contrasts are also stark when the SOG numbers are added up.
Out of the 2,000 special forces within SOG, perhaps 200 were assigned running recon. And at any given moment, about 60 of them were operating cross-border as 2 or 3 Americans with an indigenous team that they were leading. Well, those 60 Americans, their presence in Laos and eastern Cambodia was enough to tie down 40 to 60,000 North Vietnamese. These North Vietnamese were not on the battlefields of South Vietnam. Tremendous payoff. Quite possibly the largest economy of force operation in the history of the U.S. military.
Because of the risks shouldered by SOG members, America's fighting forces continue to maintain their edge in today's complicated world, willing to take on the difficult tasks asked of them by a not always grateful nation. With the knowledge gained by the passing of time and the lifting of the once impenetrable veil of secrecy, we now know how much was accomplished by the few brave soldiers of SOG.